Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Daily Flip, and today I'm going to tell you a story. And it's a story from my favorite kids author, Arnold Lobel, who writes Frog and Toad Are Friends. So let's read the story. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you are looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I'm a frog." "Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of hot tea. Frog drank the tea and then he said, "Tell me a story while I'm resting." "All right," said Toad, "let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell the frog. "I will go out on the front porch and walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me to think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad went into his house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell the frog. Then Toad poured a glass of water over his head. "Why are you pouring water over your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. So Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell the frog. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. "I am feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I do not think I need a story anymore." "Then get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because now I feel terrible." Frog said, "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well. He asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad could not think of a story. He walked up and down on the porch, but he could not think of a story. He stood on his head, but he could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he still could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but he still could not think of a story. Then the toad did not feel so well, but the frog was feeling better. So the toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story. The end. "How was that, Toad?" said Frog. But Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. So the point of me telling you this kid's story, which, by the way, one of my favorite kids' books, which I read to my kids nowadays, is that doing video and building websites and blogs and everything is about telling stories. And I'd like you to watch this back over once again and understand what a great story that was and how it went from beginning to end. And that's all we're doing here. That's all we're doing is telling stories in video form and in blog form and in text form and audio form and podcast and videos and whatever it is. If you can tell stories, you can make a video podcast or an audio podcast or a blog. That's what it's all about. I'm Jim Cockrell, and that was today's Daily Flip.
The Daily Flip.